I want to begin by thanking Congressman Robert Bobby Scott and the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation for hosting this wonderful conference. We were very excited about it. I'd also like to acknowledge our partners at Education Reform Now for all of their outstanding work and the great partnership we have around this event. And of course, I want to thank all of you for joining our forum as educators, policy experts, community activists, change makers. Each of you is helping drive the grassroots change that our education system so desperately needs. At CAP, we believe that it's long past time for our nation to boldly reimagine our approach to education. We believe that progressives must issue a new agenda and stand boldly behind that agenda, an agenda that breaks down the immense barriers which still continue to confront many of our young people, especially students of color, students with disabilities, English language learners, and students who identify as LGBTQ. We also believe that our government must dramatically expand its investment in our public schools. That includes elevating the work of America's teachers, who for too long have been paid low salaries, which fail to recognize the vital role they play in our society and in our children's lives. Earlier this summer, our team released a comprehensive plan to provide all our nation's children, no matter their background, with the chance to compete and succeed in the 21st century economy. And today, we're proud to welcome an incredible lineup of speakers and panelists who are all fighting to achieve the very same mission. In a few minutes, I'll have the privilege of sitting down with one of these guests, Wisconsin Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. But first, I have the great pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Congressman Bobby Scott. During a career in public service that spanned more than 4 decades, Representative Scott has been a progressive champion for the people of Virginia on one issue after another. We are all incredibly lucky for his leadership. As chairman of the House Committee on Education and Labor, he's focused on making our education system fairer and more equal for all. Not just a few, but for all, including freeing young people from the crippling burden of student debt, defending the rights of children with disabilities, and ending the school-to-prison pipeline. We're incredibly grateful for his outstanding leadership and really thrilled to have him here today. So please help give a warm welcome for Representative Robert Bobby Scott.
Thank you, Nira, for your very kind introduction, and I want to thank everyone, particularly the Center for American Progress and Education Reform Now, for convening this important panel. I want to particularly recognize Representatives Presley and my colleague on the Education and Labor Committee, Ayanna Hayes, who is also a Teacher of the Year. They'll be here later in the program. I want to also recognize all of the hardworking people who are supporting equity in education. Now, equity in education, the promise of equity, was first made by the Supreme Court in 1954. The court made in that unanimous decision, the Brown v. Board of Education stated that it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if denied the opportunity of an education. Such an opportunity is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. Then they posed the question of whether or not segregation of the students by race, even if the tangible factors may be equal, does that segregation in and of itself deny the children of the minority race have an equal educational opportunity? They said, we believe it does, and in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Now, with all that powerful language, we set up and fund education with the real estate tax, which guarantees that the wealthy areas will have more resources than the low-income areas. Congress passed in 1965 the ESEA, Elementary and Secondary Education Act, under Title I to put more money into low-income areas so they'd have a fighting chance. And then a couple of decades later, came up with No Child Left Behind because money wasn't the only factor. We wanted to see if achievement was what was going on with achievement, and it required that you ascertain whether or not there are achievement gaps and then do something about it when you found those achievement gaps. But the implementation was done so poorly that everybody hated it. There was one cookie cutter thing, and some of the response to achievement gaps was so convoluted that it just didn't work. We then, about 4 years ago, passed Every Student Succeeds Act, giving more control to the localities, but we did not give any flexibility on the requirement that you ascertain whether or not there are achievement gaps and then have a credible strategy to do something about it. And so we've made a lot of progress, but we've got a long way to go. And one of the areas that is most disturbing is the resegregation of schools. After years of doing something about it, aggressive Supreme Court action, after starting with Nixon, the next 11 consecutive Supreme Court justices were all appointed by Republicans. And they gradually changed the court to the point where a couple of years ago, in Seattle and Louisville, they had cities who had decided that they wanted to voluntarily desegregate their schools, and their plan was, both plans were ruled by the Supreme Court unconstitutional. Desegregate the school, unconstitutional. And so we have a long way to go. We also know that even if the factors were equal, segregation would be a problem. We know they aren't even equal. If you look at the schools that are primarily black and Hispanic, we find that to bring them up to the other schools, we need $23 billion across the country, and that's the problem. And so the schools now are about as segregated as they were in the 1960s, and that's the problem. Now, in forums like this, there's a tendency to state the problem and state the problem and state the problem, not the first solution. They even have a name for it. They call it celebrate the problem. Well, I don't want to just celebrate the problem and not talk about some solutions. There are some solutions to segregation. One is the opening doors, expanding opportunity grants under the Obama administration, where those school systems that wanted to desegregate their schools could apply for this little $30 million national program for the technical assistance on how to do an effective plan that can withstand a constitutional challenge. A lot of localities applied for the money, but before the money could go out, the new administration came in, and the Trump administration canceled the program. Well, we have legislation that we're considering now to codify the program so that people can actually get this money, and if they want to desegregate the schools, they can figure out how to do it. We also are considering the Equity and Inclusion Enforcement Act, which, as you know, under Title VI, if the Department of Education doesn't bring the discrimination case, it can't be brought. There is no private right of action. We want a private right of action, so if this administration doesn't want to bring an action for racial discrimination, the local organizations, local NAACP, can file suit on its own. They can't do that now, so we need to establish a private right of action. The bill also establishes an Assistant Secretary of Education for Title VI, and just like Title IX, where you have monitors in all the colleges and educational agencies, make sure you have a Title VI monitor to make sure that you're complying with Title VI. We also have legislation pending to the RASA to school construction, Rebuild America's Schools Act to school construction. A lot of our schools are dilapidated. The money goes first of all to those high-need schools, which are those in the segregated areas. So we are trying to do something about the problem, but it's important more than ever that parents, advocates, educators, public officials have their voices heard on educational equity, and we must force often uncomfortable but necessary conversations about the uneven allocation of resources, the disparate impact in discipline and policies, and structural barriers that are preventing everyone, particularly children of color, from getting a quality public education. So I'm grateful for all of you for showing an interest by showing up, particularly the Center for American Progress and Education Reform Now for their leadership in these efforts, and look forward to the continued discussion and actually solving the problem. Thank you.